Good morning. On behalf of the Madison Herb Society in Madison, Wisconsin, I welcome you all to the 38th Annual Madison Herb Fair and our first virtual fair. I'd like to thank our tech support person today, Vince from Empowered Streaming, who's helping us out. And I want to thank all the members of the Herb Society who have helped sponsor this event, which we're making free to all of you. Before we welcome our first speaker, I'd like to point out a couple features here on Crowdcast for chat and for asking questions. As you will have seen on the right-hand side, there's a place where you can chat and post various comments. But if you'd like to ask a question specifically for the speaker, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little tab that says Ask a Question. And you can put questions in there. And then also the rest of you, if you look at the questions, you can vote on the questions that you most want to have answered. And then we'll prioritize the questions with the most votes in the Q&A after the end of Linda's talk. So I'd like to now introduce you to our first speaker of the day, Linda Conroy of Moonwise Herbs, who will be speaking to us about herbs and fermentation for digestive health. Linda is a practicing herbalist, providing herbal education, workshops, and apprenticeships, as well as individual consultations and an online herb store. And we will be putting a link to her business, Moonwise Herbs, in the chat. So welcome, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you to everybody who's doing the work to put this on. It's a lot of work, and you're doing a great job. I'm wanting to see my PowerPoint more clearly. So I'm sorry, I'm not seeing how to move it. So I'm going to get started. Hopefully Vince can get me to the point where I can move through the slides, because I'm not able to do that at the moment.
Yeah, Linda, if you can, if just hold down Alt and then press Tab until you see the PowerPoint come up. Oh, you almost had it. There you go.
Right.
Now you can hit left and right. Yeah.
Okay. So everybody can see it. Wonderful. All right. So welcome, everyone. I'm really grateful that the fair chose this topic. It's really a wonderful topic, and it invites us to really look at our overall health and how to nourish ourselves. And herbs are just such a great way to nourish our digestive system and also to support our overall immune health. So on my first slide here, I have two of the probably most important herbs for, yes, I'm getting an echo. Vince, is there a way to reduce that echo?
Yeah, Linda, can you do me one more favor? And let's just make sure that you only have one tab of Crowdcast open. So if you can hold Alt again and then press Tab and go back into Chrome and make sure that you've only got one tab that says Crowdcast. It would say Herbs and Fermentation, and just close out anything that's a duplicate.
All right.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. We'll get this all sorted out in just a moment.
Is that better?
Yep, way better.
All right.
Okay, I'm gonna go away now. It's back to you.
So now I need my PowerPoint back again.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. So again, hold Alt and press Tab until you see the PowerPoint come up, and then we'll be good to go. There you go.
Okay. Wonderful. Good. Okay, the echo's gone. Great. Thank you.
We're all good to go. Yep.
Hear myself think. Okay, so herbs and food for digestive health. This is one of my favorite topics. As an herbalist, I work with this topic all the time. It's incorporated into my diet, for my own health. And whenever I'm working with people, we end up talking about digestive health and ways to bring fermentation and herbs together to strengthen. And I often utilize the word fortify the digestive system, which basically is a braid with all the other body systems. So it's incredible way to nourish ourselves. So I'm going to go through my PowerPoint and point out some things about the digestive system, and then what herbs support those aspects, and then how you can bring them in. So it's a lot of information. I'm going to go through it. We don't have tons of time for this presentation, so I'm going to go through it as quickly as I can and leave a little bit of time for questions at the end. So these two herbs on the cover are dandelion and chicory. They're two bitter herbs, and I'll be talking about bitters as we go along because bitters are a really important aspect of digestive health. So just wanted to note that why they're on my cover page for this topic. My next screen is a screen that just introduces me. I am a regenerative herbalist, really interested in relationship with the plants and direct connection with the earth. I'm a wild forager, a traditional and fermented food expert, and a community organizer. I did a fermentation residency with Sandra Katz, who wrote the book Wild Fermentation, and I have worked with fermented foods for over 20 years in my work and my practice and my own personal life. I love fermenting things, and it's fun, and it's like farming on your counter in your kitchen. So when we talk about this topic, and when I work with herbs and work with health in general, there are several areas to focus. First is on the herbs, and then on food, traditional, whole, and wild is what I'm looking at. And then the fermentation aspect, and then our lifestyle. Our lifestyle really affects our digestive system. And we can see that if you ever travel and see that your digestive system gets out of sorts when you travel, that's a real sign our bodies really like a certain type of routine, like some movement. So I'll mention that more toward the end, but it is an important component to all of this. So bringing all of these things together is really what an herbalist does in general. And then as we're looking at digestive health, we need all of these elements in order to support and nourish ourselves. So digestion is the center of health. Without a healthy digestive system, you really can't incorporate nutrients from your food into your body. They aren't assimilated well, and you can't even assimilate herbs or tonics. So if you're taking remedies, it's going to be a lot harder to assimilate them if your digestive system is not functioning. So it's super important to have a healthy, well-adjusted digestive system. Our microbiome, which is the conglomerate of bacteria and microbes that exist in our digestive system and really all over our body, is like a thumbprint. It's unique to each of us. So there's not really a one size fits all formula for supporting health, but there are principles. So what we're going to talk about are some principles and understand the digestive system a little bit more so that we can look at what can we bring in to help to nourish and strengthen. And like I said, a word I really like for this is fortify our digestive system. So the first aspect of our digestive system is mechanical. It's chewing your food so that you break it down into smaller pieces. And not only are you breaking it down into smaller pieces when you're chewing your food, I'm sure most of us have heard our mothers might have told us to chew our food a certain number of times, but you're moving the food around your mouth so that it touches different aspects of your mouth, that it touches some enzymes that are in your mouth, and that it sends signals and messages to the rest of the body to get ready for digestion. And so it's really important that this mechanical aspect, that we do chew our food, as much as it is to chew it into small pieces, is to move it all around your mouth. And so the mouth is a really important area where digestion actually starts. So our digestion starts there, and of course it ends at the other end of our anus. So throughout, our digestive system is basically like a open, hollow aspect, and so everything that moves through it, we're putting in there to support our bodies. So in our mouth, getting bitter foods and sour foods is really important because it stimulates receptors. So we have bitter receptor sites in our body that are really important to nourishing and supporting our overall digestive health. And then it has a ripple effect to other aspects of our health. So that goes back to my picture of dandelion and chicory. Those are bitter herbs, and there are lots of other bitter herbs. There are books specifically focused on creating bitter formulas. Chamomile is a mild bitter. We can find lots of foods that are bitter, lots of greens, even our, general greens that we eat on a regular basis have a bitter aspect. Kale's a little bitter. So we can bring these things into our diet and chew them really well. And like I said, send messages and fill in our receptor sites. Sour foods have a similar effect. They stimulate enzymes, assisting the body in breaking down food. So bringing these things into our diet, even though in this culture, a lot of us are bitter and sour adverse, mostly bitter adverse. Some of us like sour a little more, but getting used to bitters and sours is a really good idea. I tell people, find the most bitter dandelion and learn to enjoy it. In other cultures, people enjoy bitters much more than we tend to in this culture. So the other thing that's happening when you're doing this is enzymes are being stimulated. And the enzymes that exist throughout our digestive system exist to help to break down and change the food into a more assimilable form. And so the enzymes are like a conveyor belt, and they exist throughout our whole entire digestive system. And rather than taking enzymes like a supplement, it's really more effective to stimulate enzyme activity in the body, and those sours and bitters do that. So lots of sours, lots of bitters, and bringing them in and stimulating that enzyme activity so that we can more easily digest and assimilate our food. And here this goes back to the mouth, is that different areas of the mouth, and this is why you want to move the food around your whole mouth, different areas of our tongue actually pick up different aspects. So the back of the tongue is bitter, the sides of the tongue sour, in the back, and toward the front we have some salty aspects that the mouth picks up, and on the very tip of the tongue, sweet. So we want to move the food around our mouth for this reason. The next thing, and probably the most complex thing, because the mechanical aspects of digestion are in our mouth, and then, of course, our stomach, there's a lot of contracting and expanding that goes on throughout the digestive system. But the most complex aspect is chemical. And so food gets broken down by chemical agents like enzymes, we just mentioned, acids, bile. And so these things need to be, these aspects need to be fully functioning and working well in order for us to fully break down our food. So we can increase our stomach acid, we can help our stomach acid and bile by eating sours and bitters. And sours can really help increase the action and the function of the stomach acid. So then the next thing, and this is the thing we're probably most all familiar with, which are probiotics. So beneficial bacteria that help the digestive system. And so we can look at that certain bacteria have certain impact on the body. So having the most diverse bacteria introduced to our digestive system is helpful. So if we're making a lot of ferments and eating a lot of different foods, which I'll list in a minute, and we'll look at that. What foods can we bring in? How can we add herbs to those ferments also to basically potentiate those probiotics, make them more effective? And when you look at a yogurt container, for example, you'll see these 5 bacteria are often on a yogurt container, but not always. You'll see anywhere from 3 to 5 different bacteria, and they all have a different impact on the body. So it's better to have a lot of diversity than to have a monoculture bacteria, just one bacteria, where if you were taking a supplement that was only one strain, you're not going to get as much benefit as when you have the diversity. So what are some of the probiotic foods that we can eat to support our bodies? Yogurt is one, kefir, pima, those are all milk-based ferments. Miso, which is a bean paste ferment, and down here on the right-hand corner is some homemade miso that I made, and I add things like nettle to it and seaweed and different herbs. So you'll see in a minute, in a little bit, what some of those herbs offer in the form of a prebiotic. And so we've also got lacto-fermented vegetables, pickles, sauerkraut. We've fermented beverages, soda, beer, wine. I know the next presentation is going to be on making beer. And so we certainly have all these different options of things, fermented things that we can bring into our diet on a regular basis. Vinegar, and we're talking about raw, unpasteurized vinegar here for it to be fermented. Black and oolong tea are made through are produced and processed through a fermentation process after they're harvested, and then a chocolate is a fermentation process as well. So we can see fermented foods and probiotic foods have been a traditional food for a long time. People have fermented something. Every culture around the world ferments something. It's one of the things Weston Price, who was a dentist who traveled around the world and looked at traditional diets, and one of the things he said is that every single culture fermented something, and it's not only beneficial to our health, it's also a way to preserve food. They used to carry vats of sauerkraut across the ocean, and they did that because actually the process of making sauerkraut and fermenting actually produces vitamin C in and of itself. So it was a way to prevent scurvy. They would carry vats of sauerkraut in hulls of ships across the ocean so that they would prevent deficiencies that would result from lack of vitamin C. So making lacto-fermented vegetables, maybe some of you have done this, sauerkraut. And this is a picture of a lot of onions and peppers cut up. I like to put onions and peppers together and ferment them, and then add herbs like, dill or juniper berries or other herbs that will add flavor. And these peppers pretty much go on my plate with every meal that I eat. So the lacto-fermented vegetables, and you can pretty much ferment any vegetable. I don't think there's a vegetable you could not ferment in some form or another. So we can learn how to pour a salt brine on top, which is what we do with the peppers, or we can shred our vegetables and make sauerkraut, or carrot kraut, which is one of my favorites. So we can add herbs to all of our ferments. Juniper berries are traditionally added, and they add flavor and they help with preservation. Wild carrot, I often add the flowers and the leaves of wild carrot. Dandelion root, which is what this picture is here of some roots my apprentices harvested last week. Burdock, sunchokes, seaweed, nettle, wild onions, wild garlic, or any garlic really, purslane, wild grape leaves. These are all fermented. You can ferment fruit. So you can add the fruit from the grapes. You can ferment the leaves. So there's all different herbs that you can bring in. And the grape leaves, when you make pickles and you layer the leaves with the pickles, the leaves actually help keep your pickles crisp. So that's a traditional way of doing that instead of buying any kind of substance from the store. So when you're adding these herbs, they're going to add nutritive value. And also in a minute, we'll see that they also add prebiotics. So fermented food, and then you can also ferment beverages. And like I said, I know there's a presentation coming up on making beer. And one of the best books on this topic, which tells about the history of herbal fermentation and beer making, is called Sacred Herbal Healing Beers by Stephen Buhner. I highly recommend that book. It really is enchanting and talks about how, that's the way people would preserve herbs, is to ferment them, and that there are lots of other bittering agents, not just hops, that we can utilize. For example, I've made an elecampane beer, which is a great respiratory herb. So I can utilize my beer for medicine, not only for entertainment or for socializing. So we can make wine, we can make whey-based sodas, lacto-fermented sodas, switchels, oxymoles. These are all things we can turn into fermented beverages. The left here, we actually have an elderberry oxymole that I've been drinking pretty regularly these days to try to support my immune system. It's got raw apple cider vinegar in it. It's got raw honey in it, and those are steeped with elderberries, and then we add some water and some ice. On the right over here, we have blackcurrant wine that I really enjoy making. That's delicious. I also make blackcurrant soda. I make more sodas these days because I'm not a big alcohol drinker, so I make a kefir soda a lot. Cheese. I'm a home cheese maker. Cheese is a fermented food product, so we can eat cheese, and we can also add herbs to cheese. There's a cheese that's a couple different brands of cheese that have mushrooms in them and onions and things like that too, so we can add herbs to our cheese and potentiate their nutritive and immune boosting qualities. So we talked about probiotics. There's something that a lot of people don't think about in terms, or we're starting to hear more about it, but this is where herbs can really shine, is in the aspect of prebiotics and getting them into our diet to help our digestive system and support it. And the prebiotics, I often say they're food for the probiotics. So they strengthen and help the probiotics, the beneficial bacteria, the beneficial microbes, to expand and do what we call a sensory quorum, where they recognize each other and they grow exponentially. So we have 4 substances that I've listed here. Inulin is one of them, and inulin is in a lot of root vegetables. Burdock. So up here in the right-hand corner, I have a jar of burdock pickles, and I eat those pretty regularly. And then garlic and onions and dandelion roots and all of these things all have, chicory roots all have inulin in them. And inulin is a great prebiotic, and it helps to reduce blood sugar. It helps to the body, it stimulates the body to help it break down fats. So these prebiotics really, really help support the body in many ways. Algin, which is in seaweed, is another prebiotic. So I eat a lot of seaweed in my diet. And pectin, which is in a lot of fruit. And it's also, in, well, it is a fruit, but herbally it's in rose hips, or crab apples are another source. And pretty much most fruits, blackberries, cherries, I mean, most fruit has pectin in it. So eating fruit, we can also ferment the fruit so we can reduce the sugar and make and really capitalize on the pectin if we want to do that. And then we have a compound that's in grains that it's high in barley, actually, that we can actually capitalize on and bring that into our diet as well. And when we're working with grains, we actually want to soak them so that they actually will neutralize any phytic acid and other anti-nutritional compounds in them. So basically, we ferment them before we cook them, and that will neutralize and make the grain more digestible, make the nutrients in the grain more bioavailable to the body. So one of the things that we're often doing is when we're fermenting, we're breaking things down before we put them in our body so that they're more digestible and the nutrients are more bioavailable. So another aspect of the digestive system, and maybe you've heard this term, the gut brain, but there's a special nervous system, basically, it's called the enteric nervous system, that's in our gut. And that nervous system acts independently to send messages, to communicate. So there's a chemical aspect to this, but there's also a electrical, basically, aspect where the nervous system is communicating. So one of the things a lot of research is showing that our nervous system, the enteric nervous system, really affects our brain health and our mental health. And so we can actually capitalize on bringing herbal nervines into our repertoire, both our diet with foods, but also with herbs, bringing them in to support our overall gut health, because it's such an integral, important part of the digestive system. And I love this cartoon where we've got the enteric nervous system and the brain working with playing chess and talking to each other. And they do talk to each other. So that's a really important thing, is to support our nervous system in order to support our digestive system. So you see, we're looking at from all these different avenues, and if we can incorporate these things in, our overall digestion can be strengthened. So this is a list of what we call nervines in the herbal world, and these herbs affect the nervous system, and thus they're also going to affect your digestive system. My favorite top herb for supporting the digestive system is oat straw, and drinking oat straw infusions on a regular basis. So here's a big basket of oats that I've harvested. I dry them, and then I make nourishing herbal infusions. And you can find some recipes on my website, on my blog, for making nourishing herbal infusions. You can find on my YouTube channel some video on making sauerkraut and carrot kraut. So you can find some information there. There's also a recipe on my blog for making burdock pickles. So if you want to endeavor in some of this, you can go to those places and get recipes. I'm giving you an overview here. And I know some of the other workshops are going to go into more specifics on how to make some things. So that'll be great. So I also love linden. It's a mild nervine, and it's also soothing. So I'm not really going to go into what if we have a serious problem with the digestive system. If we do, we can do a lot of the things that I'm pointing out here to support our digestive system, but then we also might want to do some things to get some relief from digestive distress. So like linden, for example, is very soothing, and so it can soothe. It has a mucilaginous quality to it, so it can add a soothing quality if if your digestive system is upset. So I'm drinking it predominantly here for its nervous system qualities, but it does have other qualities, which is so often with herbs. It's not just one quality that they offer. They're often offering a multitude of different qualities. So we also have other nervines that aren't quite as nourishing as the oat straw and linden. These are more tonifying, and they can be really helpful too. St. John's wort. Just be aware if there's any contraindication with some of these, like there is with St. John's wort. If you're taking antidepressants, it's not advisable to ingest St. John's wort, for example. So make sure you do your research and your homework on this stuff, because I'm not diagnosing or prescribing anything here, and it's our responsibility to research these things and figure them out for ourselves.
Hi,
So,
Linda.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but there's some people are asking if you can make the PowerPoint bigger because you got a bunch of really good lists of herbs there. If you can click the full screen icon in the top right,
Right there?
yeah, it'll make Crowdcast go away, but it'll make it a little clearer for everyone. So
Yeah.
when we need to get back for Q&A, I'll just hop on again and help you out again.
Is that better for people?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, so and I know this is going to be available afterwards as a recording, so if you want to go back and look at the herbs, you can. But this is a really nice list of nervines. There are lots of other nervines. This is not an exhaustive list by any chance. These are some of my favorites. Like I grow skullcap, I wild harvest vervain, I grow lemon balm. So I really like the herbs that I can grow and harvest around me. I grow oat straw, and I also harvest linden wild. So hopefully that those are give you a starting point. And if you have nervines that you enjoy, you can look to those as well. So then we can look at there's our food types of food that are really helpful for the nervous system, eating lots of green leafy vegetables. So, and then we can ferment our leafy vegetables. You can add some of your greens to any ferment. You can add kale to your sauerkraut. You could add Swiss chard. So fermenting them only increases the nutritive benefits. Fish, eggs, nuts, and seeds are considered superfoods that support the nervous system, and nuts and seeds. And I'm imagining that the workshop on granola, which is going to be offered later on today too, will talk about this, but nuts and seeds need to be soaked. I mentioned this a little bit before, but I just want to reiterate it because it's super important. Soaking nuts for at least 4 hours, it will get rid of and remove the phytic acid and make the nuts more nutrient friendly and easier to digest. Those phytic acids actually interfere with our body's ability to uptake nutrients. So raw nuts and seeds, and nuts are seeds, of course, you don't want to be eating those. So you want to soak them, and that's a fermentation process. A lot of times when I soak my seeds and nuts, I'll add a little bit of whey to it. I'm a cheesemaker, so I have whey. But if you don't have whey, you could mix miso in there. Anything that's already fermented, you can put a little glug of vinegar. If you put a small glug, you won't taste it. So fermentation is an art form as well as there's some science that we understand around it. But when you're actually in the kitchen and you understand a lot of the principles, you can, use what you have on hand. You don't have to, like I've had people call me and ask me how to make whey. And I'm like, well, you make cheese and you get whey. It's a byproduct. So you don't have to make whey. You could utilize something else if you don't have whey. So another category of herbs that are really wonderful to bring into your repertoire as far as digestive health are adaptogens. And an adaptogen improves the body's ability to adapt, basically. And physiologically, this isn't just a metaphor. It really helps the endocrine system, and it helps calm the body down and not have as much of a fight or flight response, basically. And so it really helps to deal with unprecedented stress, kind of like we've been dealing with this past year. Adaptogens are really great at just helping the body and saying, okay, you can do this. And so we have a lot of great adaptogens. I love burdock is one that a lot of herbalists have been starting to add to the adaptogen list. It's not traditionally an adaptogen, but a lot of herbalists are adding it because it really does strengthen the body. Ashwagandha, holy basil is one of my favorites. I grow it, and it's really delicious and calming at the same time as it is, fortifying to the system. And then American ginseng, don't wildcraft it, but you can get it ethically grown, and that's a nice one as well. Eleuthero, reishi mushrooms. I've been working a lot with mushrooms, and reishi mushroom is a adaptogen that is specific for the lungs, actually, and overall immune health. So it's one that you could consider bringing into your repertoire. You can put it in soups. You can make a beverage out of it. There's all kinds of things you can do with reishi mushrooms, astragalus, and nettle seed are two others. So this is a really these herbs are really great for strength in the body. And I actually made some holy basil infused honey, and I took that and I put it in a jar with some water, and I added my kaffir culture to it, and then I added some rose petal honey. So I have a brewing right now, a holy basil rose petal soda. So these things are really fun to play with, and they can be really delicious. So as far as fermentation is concerned, it's actually a preservation technique as well as an approach to preparing delicious food. It's been around as long as fire has been used to cook food, and fermentation breaks down cell walls and releases nutrients. And I thought this was really interesting fact. I found this study that was conducted in rural Africa where women were using fermented foods to protect their infants from bacterial contamination while they were weaning them. And they would give them fermented foods to help adapt their immune system. And so we can look at this as an indicator. I saw this when I lived in Alaska as well. The traditional peoples would give their children either fermented foods or foods that they would chew up, which would add some enzymes, and then they would feed it to their babies. And this helps to basically inoculate the digestive system. You can find this recipe it's adapted from a book called Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. But I wanted to just throw this up here just to talk about it really quickly, because this is one of my favorite recipes to make and to have on hand throughout the year. So I make carrot kraut. So I shred the carrots, and then I add herbs. I add some ginger, sometimes some grated onion, some grated burdock, seaweed. So I'm getting my prebiotics in there with the inulin from the burdock, the algin from the seaweed, and also there'll be some inulin in the onions, and even in ginger you'll have that. And it's really a great recipe because you can add any herb to this. And the carrots ferment faster than cabbage. So people usually, if you're fermenting for the first time, it's usually you can be more successful with fermenting carrots. So I often encourage people to start here. And if you have never made carrot kraut, even if you've made sauerkraut, you might want to try it. It's pretty delicious. I especially eat it with my breakfast every morning. And then you can add cabbage to this as well if you want, but you can add anything really. So it's really fun. So I just wanted to also point out, we want to support the liver when we're looking at all of this. So the liver benefits from the bitter digestive aspect that we talked about earlier. And the liver is an important organ in the body, and we want to keep it strong and healthy. So bringing your dandelion, your chicory, burdock even is a liver support herb. It actually nourishes the blood that runs through the liver. And the liver, of course, is a sorting organ, so it sorts out the blood. And then the gallbladder is associated with the liver, and the gallbladder is really important to adding bile to help to break down the food. So supporting your liver, milk thistle is another herb that's really great at supporting the liver, and really all of your bitter digestive herbs are really wonderful for the liver. As we go through, we also have the small intestine. This is where most of our digestion happens, so I always like to just highlight it. And this is where you want to really stimulate enzyme activity, so adding your sours and your bitters. And one thing to note is that ferments are already sour, so you don't have to make this really complicated. If you're eating some fermented food throughout the day, you're already going to get your sours. And then if you add your bitters, like you could add dandelion dandelion to your kraut. So I didn't mention that to the carrot kraut, you could add dandelion, and then that would have a bitter aspect, a sour aspect, and it would have a lot of prebiotics. And it would have probiotics. So you don't have to make a lot of different things. You can make one thing and get all of the benefit from it. The large intestine is the last stop and before the food is excreted, and there's not as much digestion happening here, but we still have certain enzymes that do that last bit. And there are symbiotic bacteria that need to be in our large intestine, which again, this all gets stimulated by introducing the bitters and the sours and the other prebiotics and probiotics to the body. Now, one thing I always like to mention is that digestion and bowel movement is the end last process. And sometimes we don't like to talk about this, but this is the place where, food moves through, and it's not unhealthy to have some undigested food. Sometimes people ask, well, what's healthy? What's normal? Anywhere from 3 bowel movements a day to 3 a week can be considered normal. So you have to find out what your normal range is. And so this is the end game, and this is what we want our digestion to, end with a good outcome. And this is a place where we can look and see if there have been problems. But we're shedding cells here, the linings of our intestines. So you can see this whole chemical maneuver has to happen in harmony. Now, I always like to bring this up, and I won't belabor this, but I want to say that if we do not start composting our waste, we will not finish the fermentation process, and our digestion will not be fully completed. So I would propose that human beings would be well advised to read the book where this came from, called The Human Manure Composting Book. And it's really helpful to remind us that we need to complete the cycle. And there is a product called Milorganite. The city of Milwaukee produces it, and it is composted human manure that is used to fertilize trees and things like that. So it's not impossible. So I like to just throw that out there, even though that might seem odd in this talk, but it's very fitting, actually. So the process of making fermented foods is a technique that relies on yeast and other friendly bacteria. We're breaking down carbohydrates and proteins and making the food more digestible. Ferments are a great source of B vitamins. They help to strengthen the immune system and, again, colonize the intestinal friendly flora. And it can help to control putretive bacteria. So if you get exposed to food poisoning and you have a lot of beneficial bacteria and your microbiome is really healthy and strong, you're going to more easily get rid of the putretive bacteria, the unwanted bacteria. Your body can fend that off. If you have, a digestive system that isn't functioning well, then you are more likely to have more severe problems. I always say, though, it's not really problematic if you get exposed to food poisoning to vomit, because that's actually a protective mechanism from your digestive system. But if that continues, that's problematic. And a lot of times, if you have a really healthy microbiome and a healthy digestive system, you'll more easily be able to fight off problems that come along. So a lot of people will say, well, is fermentation safe, especially people who've never fermented anything? And so I always like to talk about this concept of what we call a sensory quorum. And a sensory quorum is where bacteria that are similar to each other recognize each other, and then they split and they basically grow exponentially. And this is what makes fermentation really a safe way to prepare food. We oftentimes will inoculate with the beneficial bacteria that we want, and then the bacteria that we want will grow. And again, it will diminish any unwanted microbes that we don't want. And there's been, research on this, and there's been, experiments that people have done to show that this is what happens. So another ferment I mentioned earlier, but I just want to talk a little bit more about it, miso. If you don't ingest miso on a regular basis, it's something you can learn to incorporate into your diet. We often in this culture don't know how to do that, but most of us might know how to make soup. But we can use this as a paste in salad dressings and sauces, and we can use it as a spread. And it's really nourishing. And one of the things that happened during the Second World War, um, people the medical practitioners were treating people who had been victims of atomic bombs. And these people were exposed to radiation, but they were eating miso, and they didn't have any ill effects from radiation. And they believed that it was due to the miso. And then in 1972, there was actually a group of researchers who proved that that was true. And so eating miso on a regular basis can help us deal with any radiation that's in the environment, because there is a lot of radiation in the environment. And then if we don't cook the miso, we can get a benefit from the beneficial microbes in the miso. And here are some ways to eat miso. Here's some miso soup with some lotus root in it. We can add it to salad dressing, and then we can use it as a pickling agent on its own. These are plums, actually, that are layered with miso, and miso is the pickling agent here. So the plums will be like an umami, like a sweet and kind of salty kind of flavor. So it might be something some of us might need to adjust to, but they're really good if you adjust to them. So there's lots of ways to eat miso in your diet. Kimchi, I think a lot of us have heard of kimchi, and this is a more spicy, basically a spicy sauerkraut that is traditional to Korea. And apparently, from what I understand, all different areas of Korea that people make different types of kimchi, so they're not the same. And that's true for ferments around the world. When we eat kefir, for example, I've had different cultures from different places, and the resulting kefir tastes a little different depending on what microbes are present. So microbes are such an important part of our food traditions. It's an important part of our health and our bodies. Um, just wanted to reiterate about pickles. We can make different pickles. One of the pickles I like to make are kohlrabi pickles. You just pour a salt brine on top of them, and you can add some herbs. But here we have some dill pickles that have some dill and some garlic in there. So you can see we've got the sour elements. We've got the prebiotic elements that we talked about earlier in these ferments. Here is, I use a culture called Pimo, which makes a cultured cream, which is really yummy. And then here's an example of kefir, which is a fermented milk product it's actually a Russian variety. It's sort of like a yogurt. And this is nicely done. And then if it gets too acidic, it'll separate out. And that's what happens with ferments. Basically, the bacteria eats sugar in the product, and milk, by the way, has a lot of sugar in it. So reducing the carbs in milk by ingesting the fermented products is going to be a lot healthier for us. And they're particularly good foods because all ferments reduce carbohydrates in the food, are really helpful for people who have blood sugar issues. I make soda from a ginger bug, where I dice up ginger and add it with sugar and water until it gets bubbly. We keep adding for a couple of days, one sugar and ginger every day until it gets real bubbly. And this is that brew here. And then we can add other things to it. Sometimes I make ginger ale. Sometimes I make rosehip soda or whatever. It's an inoculant. You're actually capturing the beneficial bacteria from the ginger, and it's delicious and tasty. So we talked about beer and wine. I won't reiterate that. And I know there's going to be a class specifically on this, so that'll be fun and interesting. Sourdough bread is another way that I also bring my herbs and wild foods into my ferments. I use wild grapes, which have yeast on them, as an inoculant. So I introduce the yeast to the flour and water. And this is a picture of a sourdough starter that exploded one morning when I came out, and it was very lively. And I make a lot of sourdough bread. It actually breaks down those phytic acids in the grain and makes the bread more digestible. So sourdough bread is the only bread that I eat. And I've seen a lot of people who are not able to eat other types of bread, and then they can eat sourdough because it's a lot more digestible. And then I'm also utilizing heirloom varieties of wheat and that kind of thing as well to increase the nutrition value of the sourdough. So we can ferment fruit. I often can fruit in the summer and fall for to put it up, and then I take that fruit, put it in a Pyrex dish, and add a little kefir culture or whey to it, and ferment it for a day or two. It reduces the sugar in the fruit. It makes a bubbly fruit. I put a little cultured cream on it, and it's delicious. So we can actually store things and then ferment them and add nutrients, activate more nutrients through the fermentation process. And I talked about sodas. I also use kefir as a starter for sodas. There's lots of ways to make beverages, so there's not just one way. Again, it's one of those creative things we can play with. And then I do want to just quickly say something about the lifestyle piece I talked about earlier. If we're going to have a healthy digestive system, eating and sleeping and having a routine is really important. Maintaining relationships that encourage you. We actually know that distress, because of that nervous system aspect of the digestive system, not having support, being stressed, can actually contribute to digestive health issues. And then the upset of microbes can actually also contribute to mental health issues. So just it's symbiotic. It's a whole package. Spend time moving your body. Our digestive system really likes movement. So keeping our body moving and, doing things we really enjoy. Celebrate when things go well. Don't not, you want to celebrate, and then cry when you need to let the stress move through you. And you can see by the mechanisms of our digestive system why all of these things are important, in addition to bringing the herbs and the fermented foods into our diet. So here are some resources. This will be available if you want. You can probably take a picture of this. These are some really good books and resources with information as well as recipes. And like I said, if you go to my blog or my YouTube channel, there are videos and there are recipes in those places. So I could talk about this for hours, but I just wanted to give you that foundation and then leave a little bit of time for questions. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Sheila's going to be coming back with us in just a minute, but until she gets back on screen, I can start to read some of those from the audience.
Okay.
We have a question from Chris saying, you have not mentioned kombucha. What's your opinion about the health benefits of kombucha?
Kombucha is not my favorite ferment, so that's why I don't mention it. And there is some controversy about it. Paul Stamets, who is a mycologist, wrote an article called The Blob, and he was talking about some actually antibiotic qualities in kombucha that could be concerning if you ingest it long term. So I would direct you to look for his article called The Blob online and read that. So based on that and the fact that I actually don't like the taste of kombucha personally, I don't include it because it's not something I work with these days. I worked with it when I first started fermenting a little over 20 years ago, but it just doesn't resonate with me.
All right, looks like we've got Sheila back, so I'm going to unmute her and she can answer, or she can field the rest of these questions.
All right.
Sheila.
Yes, well, actually, I would like Vince to ask the question about tapache because it's actually from him.
I was looking at the questions and there weren't that many, and I was actually just about to make a fermented pineapple drink.
Nice.
And I was wondering if you've ever done that, and
Yes.
if you have any tips.
Well, I love pineapple juice. It's one of my, from when I was a little kid, I always preferred it over orange juice personally. So I actually throw my kefir culture into pineapple juice and just ferment it and leave it sit for a few days until it's bubbly. And when you do that with juice or any other ferment, you can, because you could add whey too. That's another inoculant. You could utilize different inoculants, and you can just drink it, when it's ready, or you could bottle it. And a lot of times I'll bottle my sodas. You saw that I had some in my slideshow bottled. And I usually bottle a little bit in a plastic water bottle so I can feel how much pressure is in it. And then I'll bottle the rest of it in glass jars. And when I feel the pressure in the plastic bottle, I'll put it in the refrigerator, and that'll build up more carbonation. If you like that aspect, you'll get a little bit more carbonation. But yeah, pineapple juice is delicious, and it has its own enzymes that actually help you with your digestion. So it's a really good one to ferment, actually.
Great.
Thank you.
Carrie asks, will you be holding any fermentation classes this fall? And what books do you recommend for people new to fermentation? I know you had a few resources there, but
Yeah. Well, for people who are new, I highly recommend Sander Katz's first book called Wild Fermentation. It's really fabulous with recipes, and he's very relaxed, and he helps with troubleshooting in that book, and it's just a classic. So really, that is one of the best books. I also love a cookbook called Full Moon Feast, which has a lot of fermentation recipes and traditional food recipes. And then another classic book is Nourishing Traditions. So those are three books that can be really, really helpful. And so the books, what was whether I'm going to be holding fermentation classes. I had some classes scheduled, and of course, in-person classes have not been happening. And I am going to be offering some classes online. And so you can watch for those on my website. And that'll be more into the winter, but I think it's a good time to learn about fermentation, and then, fall is a good time to ferment your vegetables. We're getting way into fall. So, but you can learn how to ferment carrot kraut by watching my YouTube channel. I have a video on that topic.
great. So another question is, what is your opinion on probiotics in pill form? Are they effective in your experience?
So my experience is, and I said this in my presentation, that the more diverse the microbes, the better. And the more microbes that you get directly from your environment, the better. Because like I said, we all have, our microbiome is like a thumbprint. It's unique to each of us. So I find that fermenting food in your own home, or even if you bring fermented foods home and let them sit out and capture some of the microbes in your environment, is going to give you a lot more of that diversity than a pill or a capsule will. With a pill or a capsule, it's a monoculture. It's a very specific strain. I prefer the food and the homemade foods ideally, but if not, locally prepared probiotic foods to capsules and pills.
Do you have a favorite recipe for fermenting those huge end of season zucchinis with the seeds removed, of course, asks Lisa.
Yes. So shredding them and even adding them like to your carrot kraut can be a way to ferment them. One of the things I've also been playing with is making even vegetable pates. I make mushroom pates. I make real, meat-based pates too, but you can actually pulverize it. You can ferment pates. You can ferment sauces and things like that. So those are a couple ways that you can work with zucchini or any, overabundant vegetable. That's how I started fermenting kohlrabi, is it was so abundant. So I thought, what can I do with this? It's a little tricky with zucchini because it doesn't stay as crisp as some vegetables. So the shredding of it or turning it into a pate is a good approach. But then things like kohlrabi stay crisp, and that's really nice because in the middle of the winter I pull that out and it's still crisp, and it's nice to bite into something that's crispy.
And I actually attempted making elderflower champagne a few years ago from the yeast in the elderflowers. What I ended up with was slightly bubbly syrup. So I wonder if you've made elderflower champagne.
Oh, I have, very successfully, and I'm not sure what happened. It sounds like maybe there was too much sugar in it. I don't know. But there are lots of great recipes out there for elderflower champagne. You might want to just try a different recipe because I've been very successful. And I have I don't have it listed on my blog at this point, but I have a recipe. Even if you wanted to email me, I could send it to you.
Great.
It's delicious. And actually, I don't let it go to alcohol. I actually ferment it and leave it at the soda stage, because what happens is first you ferment something and it turns to bacteria. And then eventually, if there's yeast involved, it'll turn to alcohol. And I'm not a big alcohol drinker personally, so I turn these things into sodas. And so generally, I'm leaving it at the soda stage. But I have made champagne, and it's delicious.
Okay. Did we already ask you the question about daily ashwagandha?
No.
Oh, so there was a question, can daily ashwagandha intake be a bad thing?
No, it's a adaptogen, and adaptogens can be ingested long term for daily support. I don't see any reason. And I mean, sometimes there's some nuances, and you really need to look at your own situation. I can't really prescribe or suggest herbs necessarily for specific people, but generally speaking, adaptogens are safe for use long term.
Okay, well, that looks like the end of our questions. So I want to thank Linda very much for this wonderful presentation, and thank Vince for all the tech support. We'll be returning at 10:30 for our next session on brewing beer with herbs, not hops. Then starting at 11:45, we'll have 5 short presentations of 5 to 10 minutes from creators of a wide variety of herbal products and services. And Linda will actually be back as one of those presenters to tell you a little bit more about Moonwise herbs. And then at 1:30, we'll hear from our final featured presenter of the day. Michael McLennan will demonstrate how to make your own nourishing fermented granola with herbs. So take a little break, and we'll see you back here at 10:30.
Thank you, Sheila.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. Hi. So I'll see you all soon.
Thank you, guys.